Some people get nervous around an INFJ not because the INFJ is threatening, but because the INFJ is calm in a way that exposes everything others try to hide. Chaos bounces off them. Manipulation dissolves in front of them. Intimidation fails silently. And that quiet, steady presence makes the wrong people, those who rely on noise, fear, or emotional games to stay in control, feel suddenly powerless. It's unsettling to meet someone who doesn't react, doesn't break, and doesn't get pulled into their emotional storms. The INFJ's calm becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, unstable people see the truth of their own instability. What these people don't understand is that INFJs weren't born calm, they were shaped into it. They've lived through emotional hurricanes, survived relationships that drained them, and learned how to anchor themselves when everything around them was falling apart. Their calm is strength, not softness. It's control, not passivity. It's insight, not indifference. And when someone who thrives on chaos meets a person who cannot be shaken by it, the imbalance becomes obvious. The INFJ's centered energy exposes the other person's insecurity, fear, and emotional volatility, and it makes them nervous because deep down, they know their power has no effect here. Let me ask you something. Only the deeply intuitive will understand. Have you ever stayed calm while someone tried everything to provoke you and watched them panic instead? If you stayed until the end, calm is power. So I know you're one of the few who understands this INFJ strength. And subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind, where your silence, intuition, and emotional mastery are finally understood. INFJ Calm exposes emotional instability in people who rely on chaos for control. Some personalities survive by stirring emotional storms around them. They feel powerful when others are overwhelmed, reactive, or unsure of themselves. But the moment they face an INFJ, something shifts. Their usual tactics fall flat. Their emotional theatrics lose momentum. Their attempts to provoke, destabilize, or confuse hit a wall of stillness they don't know how to handle. The INFJ's calm acts like a spotlight, illuminating the fragile structure behind their chaos. They suddenly realize their influence only works on people who can be shaken, and the INFJ is not one of them. This realization awakens a deep discomfort, even fear, because the INFJ exposes without speaking, without trying, just how unstable and dependent on control they truly are. Inside the INFJ, this calm is not passive. It's deliberate, earned, and built from surviving years of emotional intensity. They've learned that reacting only feeds the chaos, so they choose stillness instead. They choose clarity instead of confusion. They choose grounded presence instead of panic. And people who rely on emotional manipulation feel threatened by this because they expect others to mirror their volatility. When the INFJ doesn't rise to the bait, the manipulator has to face their own emptiness. Their power never existed beyond the reactions they could provoke. The INFJ's calm strips away their illusion of dominance, forcing them into an internal confrontation they have avoided their entire lives. This is why chaos-driven people become nervous. They can't hook the INFJ emotionally. They can't push them into anger, guilt, or confusion. They watch their usual tactics slip through the cracks like water through a closed fist. And the more the INFJ stays steady, the more desperate they become, raising their voice, exaggerating emotions, escalating tension, only to be met with the same quiet presence. That stillness becomes unbearable for them because it exposes the truth. Their emotional power was never real, only borrowed from the reactions of others. The INFJ's calm becomes a mirror in which they see the instability they've spent years hiding. And while the INFJ doesn't intend to make anyone feel small, their unshakable energy does it automatically. People who rely on chaos realize they cannot manipulate, provoke, or control someone who isn't afraid of silence and isn't controlled by emotional turbulence. The INFJ doesn't need to fight to win. They simply stay calm, and in that calm, the wrong people fall apart. Their unshakable presence makes manipulators realize they have no influence. Manipulators thrive on emotional reactions. They test boundaries, push buttons, and play subtle psychological games to gain control. But when they encounter an INFJ, something unexpected happens. Nothing works. Their hints fall flat, their guilt trips hit a wall, their passive aggression dissolves in silence, and slowly, an uncomfortable truth sinks in. The INFJ is unmoved. This unshakable presence destabilizes the manipulator because it reveals the one thing they fear most: their influence is an illusion. An INFJ doesn't respond with anger, submission, or confusion. They don't take the bait. They don't get sucked into emotional traps. They simply remain still, aware, and grounded. And for someone whose identity depends on controlling others, this is terrifying. Inside the INFJ, this steadiness is not naivety, it is mastery. They've learned to read intentions beneath the surface, to sense emotional motives long before words are spoken. They understand manipulation almost instantly because they feel the shift in energy, the subtle inconsistencies, the emotional pull that signals someone is trying to get a reaction. But instead of reacting, the INFJ steps inward, observing rather than engaging. Their quiet awareness blocks the manipulator's attempts, dismantling their strategy piece by piece. It becomes clear that the INFJ is not someone who can be swayed by sweet words, dramatic displays, or emotional distortion. They see too clearly, they feel too deeply, they understand too quickly, and their silence becomes a shield no manipulator can penetrate. This is where the manipulator begins to unravel. Their usual techniques, charm, pressure, gaslighting, emotional unpredictability, suddenly feel powerless. They try harder, pushing emotional extremes, raising the stakes, intensifying the drama. But the INFJ's presence remains the same: calm, clear, unbothered. It is like trying to move a mountain by throwing pebbles. The more the manipulator realizes their tactics have no effect, the more exposed and insecure they feel. For the first time, they are forced to confront the truth that their power only works on people who are easily shaken. And the INFJ is not one of them. By simply staying grounded, the INFJ reveals the manipulator's weakness. Without emotional control over others, they have nothing. The INFJ doesn't have to fight, confront, or argue. Their presence alone dissolves the illusion of influence. And to someone who survives on manipulation, this is devastating, because nothing is more threatening to a manipulator than a person who cannot be manipulated, and nothing is more unsettling than realizing their power never existed in the first place. They stay composed during conflict, which unnerves people who expect emotional reactions. Some people navigate conflict like a battlefield. They raise their voice, throw accusations, and provoke emotional chaos because they expect the other person to crumble under the pressure. But when they direct that chaos toward an INFJ, they meet something they never prepared for: composure. An INFJ doesn't scream back, doesn't panic, doesn't collapse into defensiveness. They remain steady, grounded, and almost unsettlingly calm. And that calmness disarms the entire confrontation. The aggressor feels their power evaporate because conflict only works if both parties feed it. When the INFJ refuses to provide emotional fuel, the other person is forced to face their own volatility. They expect fire and receive stillness. They expect confusion and meet clarity. They expect drama and encounter a quiet strength that exposes how irrational and emotional they have become. Inside the INFJ, this composure is not suppression, it is strategy. They understand that conflict driven by ego or emotional volatility is a trap designed to pull them into someone else's chaos. So they choose silence over shouting, observation over reaction, stability over impulse. Their mind sharpens instead of spiraling. They listen to what is not being said. They watch behavior instead of believing words. And while someone is escalating, the INFJ is mentally stepping back, seeing the bigger picture, analyzing the motives, the patterns, the emotional triggers. This internal clarity radiates outward as calm, and that calm becomes a mirror, one that reflects the other person's instability with painful accuracy. Nothing is more unsettling to an emotionally reactive person than being confronted by someone who refuses to be pulled into their storm. The more the INFJ stays composed, the more the other person begins to unravel. They raise their voice to regain control. They exaggerate to provoke guilt. They throw emotional darts, hoping to break the INFJ's stillness. But each attempt falls flat, and each failure intensifies their frustration, because what they're realizing is simple. The INFJ is not afraid. They cannot be manipulated into chaos. They cannot be cornered by aggression. They cannot be emotionally hijacked by intensity. Their calm becomes a form of authority, quiet but undeniable, and this terrifies people who rely on conflict to dominate, confuse, or overpower others. By refusing to react, the INFJ exposes the true nature of the conflict. They reveal who is driven by fear, who is controlled by ego, who is manipulating the narrative, and that exposure is something the wrong people cannot handle. They feel their anger reflected back at them. They feel their instability highlighted. They feel their tactics losing oxygen. And in that moment, they feel small, not because the INFJ diminishes them, but because the INFJ's calm makes them confront the chaos they carry inside. Their silence forces others to sit with their own guilt, insecurity, or intentions. INFJs use silence in a way most people don't understand. It isn't avoidance. It isn't weakness. It isn't emotional retreat. Their silence is intentional, powerful, and revealing. When an INFJ goes quiet, it creates a psychological space the other person must now fill with their own conscience. Suddenly, there is no distraction, no argument, no noise to hide behind. The person is left alone with what they said, what they did, or what they intended, and that stillness becomes unbearable for anyone who knows, deep down, that their behavior was harmful or dishonest. INFJ silence functions like a spotlight. It doesn't accuse, it doesn't condemn, but it illuminates everything people try to bury, and in that illumination, guilt rises, insecurity surfaces, and hidden motives become undeniable. Inside the INFJ, silence is clarity. They know that words can distort truth, escalate tension, or give manipulative people more material to twist. So they withdraw their voice, allowing the emotional atmosphere to reveal what needs to be seen. They know when someone is projecting, lying, or avoiding accountability. But instead of fighting for the truth, they let the truth sit in the room unchallenged. The INFJ understands something most people never learn. Silence can be louder than confrontation. It forces self-reflection. It exposes emotional intentions. It makes people aware of the weight of their own actions in a way arguments never could. This is why the wrong people become so uncomfortable when an INFJ goes quiet. Those who acted manipulatively start to panic, sensing that the INFJ sees more than they're saying. People who lied feel their story unraveling in the silence. Those who tried to guilt trip the INFJ begin to feel guilty themselves. Aggressive personalities suddenly hear the harshness of their own tone, and people who rely on fast talking or emotional overwhelm lose their power entirely because silence removes the battlefield they need to operate. Without noise, they are forced to face themselves, and many do not like what they see. The INFJ silence becomes a psychological mirror, one that cannot be argued with, manipulated, or escaped. It reflects intentions back with startling accuracy, and the people who feel the most discomfort are the ones who brought the most negativity into the interaction. The INFJ isn't punishing them. The silence simply reveals what they were trying to hide, and that's why people feel uneasy, exposed, and suddenly small around an INFJ who chooses silence. They realize, perhaps for the first time, that the real confrontation isn't with the INFJ, it's with themselves. They read emotional energy quickly, making deceptive people feel seen. INFJs don't wait for words to understand someone. They feel the emotional energy first. Before a person finishes a sentence, the INFJ has already sensed the shift in tone, the tiny crack in confidence, the subtle flicker of hesitation that reveals the truth behind the surface. This ability to read energy so quickly is what makes deceptive people deeply uncomfortable. They can smile, they can perform, they can rehearse the perfect story, but the INFJ feels what the story tries to hide. And nothing threatens a deceptive person more than realizing someone can see straight through their emotional camouflage. They feel exposed, unsettled, and strangely powerless because deception depends on invisibility, something the INFJ's intuition simply does not allow. Inside the INFJ, this energy reading is not a decision, it is instinct. They walk into a room and immediately absorb the emotional atmosphere: tension, insecurity, resentment, admiration, hidden motives, unspoken fears. They don't need proof, they feel patterns. They don't need explanations, they sense misalignment. And when someone with deceptive intentions stands before them, the INFJ quietly picks up on everything: the forced warmth, the manufactured sincerity, the mismatched emotions that betray truth. They see the person's internal conflict long before the person realizes they're projecting it. This silent perception becomes a mirror that the deceptive person cannot escape, and that mirror makes them shrink from the inside out. Deceptive personalities often test the INFJ, probing to see how much they can get away with, but the INFJ's responses, or lack of reaction, make them uneasy. The INFJ doesn't fall for the charm, they don't feed the manipulation, they don't get distracted by theatrics. Instead, they hold a steady gaze, a calm tone, a grounded presence that says without words, "I see what you're not saying." This terrifies deceptive people because they depend on misunderstanding and emotional blindness to maintain control. With an INFJ, there is no blindness, there is no confusion, there is no emotional fog to hide in. Their energy is read instantly, accurately, and quietly. That's why deceivers often distance themselves from INFJs, not because the INFJ confronts them, but because being near someone who sees through them feels like standing under a bright light. Their emotional inconsistencies become obvious. Their lies feel heavier, their intentions feel exposed, and the INFJ doesn't have to say anything. The awareness alone creates psychological pressure. People who operate in shadows feel small around INFJs because the INFJ's intuition makes the shadows disappear. Their energy reading doesn't just reveal who someone is, it reveals who they're trying not to be. Their emotional regulation makes aggressive personalities lose their power. Aggressive personalities thrive on emotional escalation. They push, they provoke, they raise their voice, they trigger reactions to gain dominance in any interaction. But when they attempt this with an INFJ, something unexpected happens. Their aggression collapses in on itself. The INFJ doesn't rise to meet their fire. They don't match the intensity. They don't allow themselves to be pulled into the emotional battlefield that aggressive people depend on. Instead, they stay measured, calm, and composed, a quiet force that neutralizes the entire dynamic. And in that moment, the aggressive person realizes the truth they fear most. Their power only exists when someone else hands it to them emotionally. The INFJ withholds that power entirely, and the aggressor feels their influence crumble. Inside the INFJ, emotional regulation is a learned strength. They've been overwhelmed before. They've felt the chaos of others' tempers and refused to let it shape them again. So they've developed a controlled inner world, one that stays grounded even when conflict rises, one that evaluates rather than reacts, one that pulls back instead of exploding. When someone attempts to dominate them through intimidation or emotional volatility, the INFJ's steady presence disrupts the pattern. They watch instead of absorbing. They listen instead of reacting. They feel the energy rising and then refuse to contribute to it. And nothing is more destabilizing to an aggressive personality than someone who remains calm in the face of their chaos. The aggressor expects fear, compliance, anger, or emotional collapse, anything that gives them control. But the INFJ's calm offers none of this. Instead, it reveals how dependent the aggressive person is on external emotional responses to validate their behavior. Without a reaction to feed on, their intensity feels heavy, awkward, even foolish. They start to question why they're shouting. When the INFJ isn't moved, they feel the imbalance of energy. One person flailing emotionally, the other grounded. That imbalance exposes their lack of self-control, their insecurity masked as dominance, and their emotional volatility disguised as strength. And here is what unnerves them the most. The INFJ's calm becomes a form of silent leadership. It shifts the power dynamic entirely. The INFJ stands firm without raising their voice, without posturing, without retaliating, and that quiet control reveals the aggressor's emotional immaturity. For someone who relies on intimidation, seeing their power evaporate in real time is unbearable. They feel small, not because the INFJ diminishes them, but because the INFJ refuses to participate in the emotional game that once made them feel powerful. The INFJ's emotional regulation doesn't just protect them, it exposes the weakness behind aggression, leaving the wrong people trembling in the presence of true self-control. They don't engage in ego battles, which frustrates people who need dominance. Some people move through life in constant competition, fueled by a need to prove themselves, win every argument, and assert dominance in every interaction. They expect others to play the same game, to defend, to react, to fight back. But INFJs do not engage in ego battles. They refuse to waste their energy on petty power struggles or emotional tug-of-war. And this refusal frustrates ego-driven personalities more than anything else. When someone tries to provoke them, the INFJ simply doesn't rise to it. When someone tries to compete, the INFJ steps aside. When someone throws emotional bait, the INFJ lets it fall to the ground untouched. This quiet disengagement strips the ego-driven person of the validation they crave, leaving them feeling irrelevant, unseen, and powerless. Inside the INFJ, this is not avoidance. It is intentional clarity. INFJs see the truth behind ego battles, insecurity. The louder someone tries to assert dominance, the more fragile they actually feel. So instead of fighting, the INFJ observes. Instead of arguing, they remain composed. Instead of proving themselves, they stay rooted in who they are. They know that real strength doesn't announce itself, and real confidence doesn't need an audience. Their calm refusal to participate in ego theatrics exposes how childish and performative the other person's behavior really is. It's like watching someone fight their own reflection. Dramatic, loud, but ultimately meaningless. People who rely on dominance become deeply unsettled by this dynamic. Their usual tactics fail. They can't provoke jealousy, trigger insecurity, or ignite competition in an INFJ. They expect resistance and get indifference. They expect confrontation and receive silence. They expect emotional volatility and find grounded presence. This mismatch reveals a painful truth they don't want to face. Their need for dominance only has power over people who feel threatened. So the INFJ feels no threat. No envy, no desire to be on top, and that neutralizes the entire game. Ego-driven individuals suddenly feel inflated but irrelevant, loud but unheard, powerful but ineffective. And here is where the real frustration emerges. The INFJ's disengagement exposes the emptiness of dominance itself. Without someone to overpower, the aggressive ego collapses under its own weight. The INFJ's calm sends a silent message: I'm not playing your game because your game doesn't matter. And that message is devastating to anyone whose identity depends on winning. They feel small, not because the INFJ diminishes them, but because the INFJ refuses to validate the ego they hide behind. In that quiet refusal, the INFJ reveals the truth. Dominance is nothing when the other person simply walks away from the battlefield. Their inner strength is quiet but undeniable, creating tension in anyone who fears authenticity. INFJs do not project strength the way most people expect. They don't brag, intimidate, or overwhelm. Their strength lives in their truth, steady, grounded, and quietly powerful. And this kind of strength creates tension in people who fear authenticity, because the INFJ stands as living proof that real power does not need to shout. Their presence alone unsettles those who build their identity on image rather than substance. People who hide behind loud confidence, dramatized emotions, or superficial charm feel something strange in the INFJ's presence, exposed. They sense a depth they cannot fake, a clarity they cannot bend, and an inner solidity they cannot influence. This quiet strength forces them to face the parts of themselves they avoid, and that confrontation is what makes them nervous, defensive, or suddenly small. Inside the INFJ, this strength is the result of years spent observing, learning, hurting, healing, and becoming. It is not dramatic, it is earned. They have been underestimated, dismissed, misunderstood, and every experience sharpened their inner steel. They carry the ability to stand alone without collapsing, to hold emotional storms without breaking, to choose silence without losing their voice. And when someone tries to shake them, they stay centered. When someone tries to manipulate them, they stay aware. When someone tries to project false confidence, the INFJ senses the fear beneath it instantly. This internal stability radiates outward as an unmistakable presence, subtle but unshakable, and it highlights the fragility in people who rely on external validation for strength. Those who fear authenticity often react unconsciously to this dynamic. They become defensive without reason, they talk louder, pretend harder, perform more aggressively, they try to reclaim control through dominance or attention seeking, but the INFJ's calm unmasks the insecurity driving their behavior. The more genuine and steady the INFJ remains, the more artificial the other person feels in comparison. It's not that the INFJ exposes them verbally, it's that authenticity exposes inauthenticity automatically. Just by being themselves, INFJs create an emotional contrast that makes pretenders acutely aware of their own hollowness. And here lies the tension. The INFJ does nothing loud, yet everything significant shifts around them. People sense the weight of their truth. They sense the firmness of their boundaries. They sense the depth of their perception. Those who embrace authenticity feel inspired by it. Those who fear it feel threatened. Because when an INFJ stands quietly in their strength, they don't shrink others. They reveal who is afraid to stand in their own truth. In the end, an INFJ's calm is not just a personality trait. It is a force that reveals what others work hard to hide. It exposes instability in the chaotic, insecurity in the loud, guilt in the manipulative, and fear in the inauthentic. The wrong people don't get nervous because the INFJ is threatening. They get nervous because the INFJ's presence shows them exactly who they are without the mass, noise, or emotional games they usually depend on. Quiet strength has a way of shaking foundations built on illusion, and INFJs do it effortlessly, without raising their voice, without losing their center, without stepping out of their truth. Let me ask you one thing before you go. Have you ever noticed people acting strangely around you simply because you stayed calm while their ego fell apart? If you made it to the end, calm power. So I know you're one of the rare ones who understands the strength hidden inside silence. And remember to subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind, where your depth, intuition, and quiet authority are finally recognized for the power they truly are.